welcome everybody to North East Lincolnshire and Grimsby, this wonderful town hall. We have with us today our two parliamentary candidates. We have Steve Harness for Cleethorpes, and we have Victoria Ayling for Great Grimsby. Now, first of all, has anybody still got a question they want to ask? Would they raise their hands, please? And then Matt will come round and take these papers. Okay? Right, I'm going to introduce our candidate. And most of you know he's ready to go, he's chomping at the bit. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Harness.
I will say, for me, this is a very surreal experience. Not only being called a racist on my way in, which quite obviously none of us are, I've had the opportunity to meet Nigel on a number of occasions throughout the country. Never in a pub, I must admit, but there's time for that yet. But Nigel has always been the best of company and the most entertaining person to meet. I've also had the opportunity to be in the audience when Nigel's given a keynote speech. And as we know, Nigel is probably the best orator in the country at this present time. But I've never had the honour to be on a platform with Nigel, so this is very special for me. And of course, it was Nigel that got me into politics back in 2009. It was Nigel that actually convinced me that what was happening with the European Union wasn't right, that there were things that we had been deceived over, that we'd given away our fishing industry, and we were about to give away a lot of our industry as well. And it was Nigel's appearance on programmes such as Question Time that convinced me that it was time I got involved. So that's why I joined UKIP back in 2009. Then bizarrely, in 2010, I was elevated to the position of Cleethorpes candidate. I stood in Cleethorpes, another member called Henry Hudson stood in Grimsby. We were both very naive, but both of us retained our deposit. So that was telling us something, that there is a support for UKIP in this area. But I would also, at this point, just like to talk about two founding members that we had at that time when I joined UKIP. One of them was a chap called Councillor John Stockton, who is around here today, who was still very active. Another one was a lady called Jackie Morgan. And Jackie was one of these people that was an activist that did everything she possibly could to promote the cause of UKIP. Unfortunately, Jackie's not with us at this time, but Jackie did live long enough to see UKIP retain its first councillor in Councillor Ron Shepherd. And I would like to think that Jackie is up there somewhere looking down on this event with a smile on her face, thinking, you know, this is something that she actually started. So we had Ron Shepherd elected in 2012. I was elected as a councillor in 2013. We then had a defector from the Labour Party who joined us, that was Councillor Bramley. But our breakthrough year was 2014, when we stood 15 candidates in the wards in North East Lincolnshire. We returned 7 councillors and had 8 second place returns, which was quite a remarkable achievement. We also had, in 2014, another indication of the support we have, and that was in the European elections. Now, the count for the European elections took place in this very room. And if you can try and picture the scene, it was counting the votes in the centre of the room, and all around the perimeter of the room was representatives from the other political parties. There were 7 UKIP representatives in the room. I was one of them. As the count progressed, it became obvious that UKIP were doing pretty well. Unfortunately, North East Lincolnshire hadn't actually invested in any purple pegs, so they were using brown pegs. There was blue pegs, red pegs, yellow pegs, but there wasn't actually any purple pegs. But it became obvious as the count took place and the pile of UKIP votes, it became obvious that something special was happening. By the time they came to announce the result, all the other parties had left the room. They didn't have the good manners or grace to stay and offer a congratulations. But when the announcement was made, there were 7 UKIP representatives left in the room, and obviously it was a landslide victory for UKIP. Now, interesting for me, because obviously I'm the Cleethorpes candidate, those results were mirrored pretty much the same in North Lincolnshire. So that gives me hope that that support is up there in North Lincolnshire. So when these elections take place, we will actually be fielding 15 candidates in North East Lincolnshire. And for the first time, we will be testing the water in North Lincolnshire, out in Barrow and Ferry. And I can see we have our candidates here tonight. So really, there isn't a great deal more to add about this, apart from when our guest note speaker comes out, Nigel Farage. He is the one who started this. I think Nigel has said that he doesn't want to be Prime Minister. Well, I think to a great many people in this country, he is already the unofficial Prime Minister. He is probably the only politician at this present moment that makes sense when he opens his mouth. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Steve. Very eloquently put, I must admit. Next up, because I'm mindful of the time, is a fine lady. She's a fighter. Victoria Ayling.
Thank you for that, and thank you for coming here tonight, and thank you to Steve Harness, who is a very hard-working councillor and a credit to UKIP. Grimsby has been neglected for years, ignored by successive politicians from established parties. No infrastructure, no jobs, since the fishing industry was snatched from us by governments who didn't seem to care about the people here. On the doorstep, people have had enough. It's time for a change, and that change is in the air in Great Grimsby. I've lived in the real world. I've had a job at a Humber-based fishing processing industry, which was actually British cod liver oils, Grimsby and Hull. I heard the stories there of what was going on out in the streets. I've moved in and lived in the area for many years and raised 3 sons. And again, the plight of our young, with 25% youth unemployment in Grimsby, it's not acceptable. And the people realise they've been conned and lied to by successive politicians for many years. I'm making it my mission, and UKIP will make it their mission, to get our country back. And in Great Grimsby, we need infrastructure, not false promises and platitudes. We need our railway electrified so we have a decent rail infrastructure. Improved roads. Every time you get another incentive from the government to say, oh, we're doing infrastructure, we're getting our roads done. Grimsby and Lincolnshire are left out completely. This is... You are fantastic.
Hi, guys. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for turning up in this magnificent town hall. It's wonderful, isn't it? And it says something about Grimsby. It says Grimsby used to be a great place, but that Grimsby is now a bit down at heel. And I wonder why that is. I wonder what's gone wrong. Could it be anything to do with Ted Heath signing us up to the common market 40 years ago giving away our territorial waters. But to bring you more up to date, our revered Prime Minister from 1997 to 2005, the oh-so-popular Tony Blair. Oh, I've misread the audience. I must have got that one wrong. Tony Blair, you may have seen, intervened in politics yesterday. He said that we should not have a referendum on the European Union because it was in our interests to remain a member of it. Well, is that the same Tony Blair that said if we didn't join the single currency, this country might be severely reduced and all our businesses would leave? Is it the same Tony Blair who promised us a referendum on the European Constitution and didn't deliver it? And is it the same Tony Blair who has now made millions of pounds out of the very giant corporate companies who work hand in glove with the European Union to the detriment of ordinary working people? I think it is, don't you? And what Tony Blair ought to do, he ought to come to Grimsby. He ought to come to Grimsby and meet some of the people I've just met in the street. Because what has happened to this place is a tragedy. There is no better or more glaring example of what a total mistake this European project has been. Now, please do not misunderstand me or take me out of context. I am not against Europe or the European nations or the European people. Far from it. It's a great place to go on holiday. Some of us, well, it is. Some of us quite like drinking the wine. I'm rather well known for that. I mean, I like Europe so much, I'm even married to one of them, all right? So we've got no problem with Europe as a place or the European people. But we've got a massive problem with the European Union, with political union, with all these countries being tied together. Because what happened here was we joined something as a result of joining the common market called the Common Fisheries Policy. And we did that at the very moment that we lost the cod war against Iceland. Losing the cod war against Iceland was a big blow to a town like Grimsby, but the result of the cod war was that in 1976, international territorial waters were redefined. Pre-76, 12 miles was the limit that any nation had total control over. Post-1976, that became 200 miles. And what we have done is the very opposite to what they've done on the other side of the North Sea, to what they've done in Norway. And in Norway, they have a 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and all the fish that swim and spawn in those areas are the possession of the Norwegian nation. And Norway has a thriving fishing industry. And the fishing industry there employs tens of thousands of men and women. And what we have done, as a result of membership of the Common Fisheries Policy, we are now allowed to catch less than 20% of the fish that swim in British waters. The other 80% we've given away to the rest of Europe. And that is why Grimsby has now been reduced to 15 fishing boats. That is why all the filleters and all the processors in this town import either 80 or, on a bad day, 100% of their fish in from Iceland and Norway. Have you noticed Iceland and Norway are not members of the European Union? And when Britain leaves the European Union, Grimsby once again will be a great fishing port. Now, last week I took part in a televised debate against the other leaders. One or two of you may have seen it. And it's pretty clear to me there are now only two parties in British politics, because the other six represented professional, career, political class. It's a political class that has become so politically correct that it is so bound up in our membership of the European Union that it actually doesn't believe that we should put the interests of this country and the people of this country first. And I say shame on them, because they may shout at me, they may throw abuse at me, but the fact is, if you don't run your own country, if you don't control your own borders, you're not the master of your own destiny. You know, we had immigration in Britain running from 1950 up until 1998 at roughly net 30,000 people a year. Now, because of the open door policy, it is 300,000 people a year coming into Britain, and we have no control over it whatsoever. And the impact has been that young mothers can't get their kids into the right primary schools because there simply aren't the places. The rest of us struggle to get a GP appointment or find ourselves waiting ever longer at accident and emergency. But the biggest casualty of open-door immigration has been ordinary men and women and their families, people earning average wages, people earning the minimum wage, because what has happened over the last 10 years is their wages have been driven down by this massive oversupply in the labour market. The beneficiaries have been the rich. The beneficiaries have been the big businesses. The beneficiaries have been the big landowners. And we're told on the television that this is a good thing because the gross domestic product of our country has risen. Well, what is the point of the gross domestic product of this country rising if living conditions for ordinary families have gone down? Something must be done. Now, 77% of the British population want to take back control of our borders. And interestingly, every single ethnic group in Britain agrees with that proposition too. But the only party that can offer a positive solution is UKIP. It's UKIP. We want a referendum on our membership of the European Union, and we want it as soon as possible because we want to take back control of our borders. And when we've done that, we've got the positive solution going forwards. What we want to put into place is the Australian-style point system so that we can choose the quantity and the quality of who comes to our country. Isn't that the solution for the future? So I believe on this, the single most important issue in the minds of electors, it is only UKIP that is telling the truth. It is only UKIP that is offering a positive solution, and the establishment are terrified of us. They're so scared of us, they've decided there's no point going for the bull. They're going to go for the man instead. And that is why they throw out endless abuse, saying that we're extreme and racist and bad people. It is not racist or extreme or bad to want to control your borders sensibly and to make sure that immigration once again becomes a positive in our country and not a negative. It is the right thing to do. And we also want to inject some honesty into the debate about the economy. OK, Mr Cameron tells you there is growth in the economy, everything is fixed, and you're all feeling the benefits of this so-called economic boom. I bet you're really feeling it in Grimsby, aren't you? Yeah, quite. The point is, folks, that this coalition was put together to reduce the annual deficit, to reduce the annual overspend down to zero. That was their objective 5 years ago, and it is still running at £90 billion a year. Let me put it another way. When David Cameron became Prime Minister and George Osborne became Chancellor, our accumulated national debt, That's the debt we've been running up since we fought Napoleon, etc. Our accumulated national debt was £850 billion. It is now £1.5 trillion. They have doubled the debt. They've doubled our national debt in 5 years. They've increased our national debt more than Gordon Brown managed to do in 13 years of Labour rule. And the truth is this: we cannot go on living as a country substantially beyond our means. Already, the debt repayments on our debt are bigger than the defence budget. And in a few years' time, will be bigger than the education budget. And all of this at a time when interest rates are at rock bottom, down pretty close to zero. Of course, we've got growth in the economy by running a debt like that. You know, if you max out your credit cards every month, your lifestyle will improve, but at some point, you've got to pay the bill, haven't you? So what UKIP are doing is offering some practical solutions as to how we can get this government debt down. We want to stop paying a net £10 billion every year to the European Union. We want a relationship with Europe based on trade and friendship, but not to pay £55 million a day to Brussels, who haven't signed off their accounts for 19 years in a row. That's a good start. And we then want and we then want to deal with what David Cameron says has been his proudest achievement in government. And in this, he was complimented by Ed Miliband. They say that the fact that we now give more money in foreign aid than any other Western country is something we should be proud of. I bet it warms the cockles of your heart, doesn't it, to know? Right, well, we want to cut £10 billion a year from the foreign aid budget, all right? And we want to end what is known as the Barnett formula. Or as I described it to Nicola Sturgeon's horror last week, stop shoveling money over Hadrian's Wall because it's not fair on the English, all right? And we want to stop this bizarre vanity project that is called HS2 at a time when the country is skint that might cost us up to £70 billion. An end to that. But we do want to spend some money. And what we want to do is to make sure that everybody working in this country who is earning the minimum wage is taken out of a tax system altogether to give people incentives to get off benefit and to get back to work. And there's one government department where overall spending needs to increase, and that is our defence budget, where successive governments have run down our army, our air force and our navy, frankly, in a way that I think is shameful. We're not in a position to defend ourselves. We're certainly not in a position to defend our sovereign dependent territories like the Falklands. We need to spend a little bit more money on defence. Not to do so in a very uncertain world is rather like saying, I won't pay the house insurance next year because I don't think there's going to be a fire. Well, it's okay if there isn't a fire, but it's a disaster if there is a fire. So we want to increase defence spending to 2%, and we want to make sure that not just those that are currently serving have the right equipment and have the right battle groups, but we also feel the way successive governments have treated our men and women that have come back from Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere, some physically impaired and some mentally impaired, frankly has been shameful to this country. And we would like to appoint a veterans minister we would like to open up a specially dedicated military hospital, and we'd like to open up some hostels. We'd like to open up some hostels to former servicemen and women who've fallen on hard times. You know, 1 in 10 of the people that sleep rough on the streets of this country every week have at some point been in the armed forces, and the least we can do as a country is to repay some of the debt that we owe them. Now, last year we achieved amazing things. We won the European elections. We then had 2 members of Parliament who left the Conservatives and joined us, but on a point of principle resigned their seats, put themselves up for by-election on the basis, as they both said, that ultimately it's the people who are the boss. Wasn't that refreshing to hear language like that from politicians? But we now go into a general election, and this is the highest hurdle in politics that I've yet had to jump. In fact, it's a bit like Beecher's Brook that the horses will have to face this Saturday. It is a big hurdle for us to climb, but we can do it. Remember, neither Cameron nor Miliband is going to form a majority. One will be the biggest party, but neither can form a majority. So it'll be a bit like it was in 2010. It'll be the other parties that ultimately decide the makeup of the next government in 10 Downing Street. And I believe we've every chance of UKIP being part of that mix. I have every reason to believe that we can find ourselves on May the 8th in a position of influence, in a position to change things. Please don't misunderstand me. I don't want to sell out. I don't want a ministerial car, but I do want to drive the agenda in British politics in the next 5 years. And we will use whatever influence we have in the House of Commons after May the 7th to try and make sure that the British people are given a full, free and fair referendum so that we can decide who governs Britain and Tony Blair can go to hell. All right? I thought they'd like that.
Wow. Thank you for that, Nigel. I feel a bit insignificant now. Right, the moment you've all been waiting for. We've got some questions, and hopefully we'll get some straight answers to these questions. This question is from Lydia. Cecil Bosia, would you hold your hand up, please? Hi. Difficult name for me, that one. Thank you. How easy or difficult will it be to renegotiate over our EU membership? Now, do you want to have a go at this one, Victoria?
I'll start, and I'm pretty sure Nigel will have a few things to say. There's no renegotiation possible. Juncker's has said it. Merkel's said it. They laugh at us even considering it. And Cameron's saying it to lie, to try and grab votes and con us all. I left the Tory party and I told Mr Cameron to his face that he was disingenuous and I didn't believe a word he said. Now people in this country are beginning to think the same. There can be no renegotiation in Europe, and I'm sure Nigel would like a few words as well on this.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, you know, whilst we're talking about David Cameron, please, let's not forget about Ed Miliband, because Ed Miliband chose the opening speech of the general election proper to talk about, as he saw it, the benefits of membership of the European Union, which proves that fully and finally the Labour Party is now a party of the corporates and has completely turned its backs on working men and women in this country. All right, so we must remember that. It is possible, Lydia, that in a renegotiation, if two things were achieved, it may be possible that the Brits would vote to stay in a reformed and changed European Union. However, there are two things the Brits want. One is the return of the supremacy of our law, meaning that our own Supreme Court would be superior to the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights. You know, we'd be able to decide ourselves whether prisoners got the vote, for example. I do have a view on that, by the way, and it's a pretty firm no, but there we are. So that's one thing that if he could renegotiate, we might be tempted by. The second thing that the British people want, and overwhelming, nearly 80% of them want, is control back of our borders, which would mean ending the unrestricted free flow of people with 10 former communist countries and with a Eurozone in the Mediterranean that is going through such deep misery. And on both of those points, there is no renegotiation. You know, I know Juncker, I know Tusk, I know these people over there. In fact, with me in the European Parliament, it's been up close and personal for many, many years. This is not up for negotiation. So frankly, if we enter into a 2-year period of renegotiation, followed by a referendum, all we're doing is wasting 2 years. Wasting 2 years of potential fishing opportunities in Grimsby. Another 2 years of who's to say how many hundreds of thousands more people coming and settling in this country. There is no substantial renegotiation on offer. The choice is simple. It's yes or no. Do you wish to govern your own country? Do you wish to control your own borders? Or are you happy for these decisions to be taken elsewhere? That is what it comes down to.
Right. We've got our last question now. James Bell, can you hold hand up, please? Thank you, James. Should strikes in the NHS be banned or meet a turnout threshold that politicians don't? It's a very good question.
Well, I've met quite a lot of politicians who are permanently on strike, so there we are, and whose workloads and work rates are not perhaps what the taxpayer would expect of them. Look, you know, people do have the right to strike, of course they do. It is a fundamental right, but we have to make sure that sufficient numbers of people in a proper, open process have not been intimidated to voting for a strike. And we saw some of those reforms coming in the 1980s, and they were the right reforms, and we need to be quite robust on this, because actually issues like the right to strike and issues like employment legislation are no longer the preserve of the British government. They're in fact things that are decided now at an EU level. So whatever your view on that question, it now doesn't really matter whether you have a Tory government or a Labour government, because these big decisions are taken somewhere else. And look, 75% of the laws that are now made in this country are made somewhere else, over which we have a minority say. And whilst they might make some good laws, if they make bad laws, there is nothing that we, through a democratic process, can do to change any of that. And that goes against what is parliamentary democracy. It goes against the thing that we, more than any other nation on earth, worked over centuries to build, and twice, at massive sacrifice in the 20th century, fought to defend. It is something that matters. It is part of our core, our ability, our power to hire and fire the leaders of our country. And really what we vote for now is not a change of government, it's a change of management, because many of those big decisions are taken somewhere else. And our leaders, believe me, our leaders don't think we're good enough to run our own country. They don't truly believe in Britain and believe in the British people. And I am unashamedly patriotic, and I do believe we're good enough, and I do believe the right thing. And I do believe the right thing is for us to run our own affairs and to be accountable for it, for us to control our own borders, for us to negotiate our own trade deals on the world's seas. And on a passing, ending note, I believe we're good enough in Grimsby to go and catch our own fish. Good luck, Victoria. Thank you, everybody.